They'd be working outside, right?
Sure is. We're actually going to work outside building a picnic table.
How did I end up on this old house? Russ Morris was the creator of this.
For decades, Tom Silva stood as the unshakable cornerstone of this old house. A man whose hands built walls, but whose values built something far more lasting: trust. To millions, he was the calm voice during chaos, the master craftsman who never cracked under pressure, the quiet mentor who led by example rather than ego. But behind the camera, even in the neatly framed world of home renovation TV, things weren't always level. Now, after more than 40 years of loyalty, late nights and impossible deadlines, Silva is breaking a silence he held longer than most careers even last. In a rare and unfiltered moment, the beloved contractor exposed the 5 worst employees he ever worked with, and the reasons will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the show. These weren't just rookies with bad attitudes or lazy hands. These were seasoned pros who had all the credentials but still managed to fail in ways that nearly shattered homes, jeopardized safety, and cracked the very foundation of what this old house stood for. One made unauthorized changes that derailed entire remodels. Another walked through job sites like a storm of complaints and chaos. And one, trusted by Silva himself, nearly caused a catastrophic structural collapse, all while pretending nothing was wrong. For years, Silva kept these stories buried beneath the drywall and behind the scenes. But not anymore. What changed? Why now? And who exactly made the list? The answers are raw, real, and reveal a side of this old house few ever get to see. So buckle in, because the blueprints are out the window, and the truth is finally hitting the foundation. At first glance, Mike Holloway looked like a dream hire. He had the skills, the swagger, and the resume of a seasoned carpenter ready to take on anything. But according to Tom Silva, it didn't take long to realize that Mike's biggest tool was his ego, and that tool did more damage than any hammer ever could. Holloway joined the This Old House crew in the early 2000s, and while his craftsmanship was undeniable, his attitude was even louder than his impact driver. He dismissed feedback with smirks, rolled his eyes during briefings, and strutted through job sites as if the rules were made for someone else. Silva tried mentoring him, offering advice, extending patience, but Mike didn't want guidance. He wanted control. That became painfully clear during a kitchen renovation project where Holloway decided, without permission, to completely override the architect's layout. He repositioned the sink, reshaped the counters, and most shockingly, removed a structural support beam that was meant to stay. When Silva confronted him, Mike's only defense was that the original design didn't work, so he fixed it. What followed wasn't a correction, it was a crisis. The team had to waste 3 days and thousands of dollars reversing Mike's unauthorized decisions. But the friction didn't stop at blueprints. During another shoot in Newton, Holloway clashed with Richard Trotherway in full view of the entire production team. The argument wasn't just technical, it was personal. Mike lectured Richard, a decades-long expert in plumbing, about pipe routing like he was training an apprentice. The tension got so bad that host Kevin O'Connor had to step in before it turned physical. That incident was a warning sign, but the final nail in Mike's career came during a project in West Roxbury. The homeowners had chosen a specific reclaimed wood for the floors, wood with emotional value, tied to a family barn. Everyone respected the sentimental request, everyone but Mike. Deciding it didn't look modern enough, he ordered new planks without telling Silva. When the owners arrived, the wife was devastated. Tom stood there watching her hold back tears, and knew in that moment that Mike Holloway didn't just make a mistake, he violated something sacred, the trust between crew and client. Silva took the blame publicly, as any real leader would, but behind the scenes, he had one final meeting with producers. Mike was quietly phased out, no dramatic exit, no second chances. He finished the job, but never returned for another season. To this day, Silva considers Mike one of the most challenging people he's ever worked with. Not because Mike wasn't talented, he was, but because talent means nothing when it comes wrapped in arrogance, isolation, and disregard for the very people you serve. Mike didn't just break the rules, he broke the spirit of the team, and in a show like This Old House, that's the one thing Tom Silva will never tolerate. If Mike Holloway was the storm that clashed with everyone in sight, Darren Cole was the slow leak, quiet, constant, and ultimately corrosive to the foundation of everything Tom Silva stood for. Unlike Mike's overconfidence, Darren's flaw was more insidious. He simply didn't care. From the moment he stepped onto the set of this old house, it was clear he lacked the urgency and drive expected of Silva's crew. He brought his tools late, left tasks unfinished, and always had an excuse chambered like a weapon. The shipment's late, the gauge is wrong. It's too humid today. It didn't matter what the challenge was, Darren had a reason why he couldn't do his job, and none of those reasons ever had anything to do with accountability. But on this old house, excuses don't build walls. They break down momentum. One of Darren's most infamous moments happened during a critical renovation in Cambridge. The house was an old colonial beauty that needed a full electrical overhaul. Darren was assigned the upstairs wiring, a task that had to be perfectly timed with plumbing, drywall, and painting schedules. The team was already working tight, but Darren decided to work looser. He showed up late 3 days in a row, and when he finally began, what he left behind wasn't just incomplete, it was dangerous. Wires dangled from ceilings without junction boxes, exposed and unsecured, in a space where people walked daily. When Silva confronted him, Darren shrugged and muttered, "I'll come back to it later. It's fine for now." Fine for now. Those 3 words made Silva's blood boil. This wasn't a backroom fix, it was a potential fire hazard waiting to ignite. Tom spent the rest of the day redoing Darren's work just to ensure no one got hurt, but that wasn't the only time the crew had to clean up after Darren. On that same project, plumber Richard Trethewey had to delay his install for 3 full days because Darren hadn't finished routing wires through a shared wall. That delay cost the production team serious overtime, contractor penalties, and left homeowners scratching their heads. Darren didn't apologize. Instead, he blamed the house layout, a layout Silva had seen hundreds of times. This wasn't a matter of poor design, it was poor work ethic, and that Tom Silva knew was the hardest thing to fix. While Silva didn't demand Darren's firing, the decision was made by the end of the season. Darren was dropped quietly, just like the wires he left hanging in that ceiling. Because on this old house, there's no room for people who leave problems for others to fix. Tom Silva believes that every member of the crew should treat the home like it's their own. Darren, he treated it like someone else's problem. And when someone works like that, no matter how many tools they carry, they'll never be part of Silva's team. Every team has its loudmouth, but Ray Jensen didn't just make noise, he brought a storm. From the moment he arrived on the set of this old house, Ray didn't come to paint walls. He came to paint conflict across every corner of the job site. Hired through a subcontractor during a fast-paced Victorian home renovation in Arlington, Ray seemed like a last-minute puzzle piece. But instead of fitting in, he cracked the entire frame. On day 1, he showed up 30 minutes late, minor maybe. But when he finally walked in, instead of apologizing or jumping into work, he flopped onto the porch and muttered about the project's crooked walls and garbage primer. Tom Silva introduced himself politely, offering a warm welcome. Ray looked up, scowled, and fired back. "You guys cut corners." That single phrase hit like a sledgehammer. Silva had heard criticism before, but never from someone who hadn't lifted a single brushstroke, and this was just the beginning. Within hours, Ray's voice echoed through the house, not with instruction or teamwork, but with complaints, curses, and chaos. He screamed when he spilled paint, shouted at electricians, and argued with other tradespeople for the smallest inconveniences. One particularly telling moment came when an electrician named Leo moved Ray's ladder, just slightly, to clear a hallway. Instead of resolving it calmly, Ray launched into a tirade that left half the crew frozen in disbelief. Tom had to step in, urging Ray to take a break. But the break didn't break the tension. The next day, Ray's brushstrokes were as sloppy as his temper. Uneven lines, streaky trim, and careless drips stained the project's near-finished woodwork. When Silva pointed out the flaws, Ray didn't take notes. He snapped back, claiming Tom's expectations were too high. By the following morning, things reached a boiling point. During filming, Ray exploded again, this time at a producer, halting production and alarming not just the crew, but visiting homeowners who witnessed the chaos firsthand. That was the final stroke. Silva called for a replacement, and Ray was cut from the crew like a bad scene. But Ray wasn't done. Weeks later, he posted a bitter online rant, calling this old house fake, accusing them of stifling real artistry. But what Ray didn't understand, and what Silva has always preached, is that craftsmanship isn't just about brushstrokes, it's about attitude, respect, and teamwork. Ray may have known how to paint, but he couldn't color within the lines of professionalism. His noise drowned out the harmony of the crew. And for Tom Silva, who built his career on steady hands and steady leadership, Jensen was the kind of painter who left more damage than beauty behind. Some failures you can predict: a bad attitude, missed deadlines, or sloppy craftsmanship. But what Tom Silva never saw coming was betrayal from someone he trusted. That's what made Carl Peterson's fall from grace all the more devastating. Carl wasn't a rookie or an outsider. He was a respected contractor with years of experience and a calm, reassuring presence that viewers and crew members alike admired. When this old house launched a major brownstone renovation in Boston, tight deadlines, historical preservation, and structural complexity all packed into one, Carl was brought in to lead the interior structural work. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Carl managed floor leveling, reinforced beams, and passed early inspections. Tom, who had worked with him before, had no reason to doubt him. But behind the scenes, Carl was juggling something no one on set knew about: a second private project across town. And instead of turning down the work or being transparent, he did the unthinkable. He split his time between both jobs and quietly subcontracted his duties on this old house without informing the producers or Silva. The consequences weren't just disappointing, they were almost catastrophic. During filming, the team prepared to demo an interior wall as part of a kitchen remodel. Before that could happen, the support beams in the basement had to be reinforced. Carl had assured Silva the job was done, even responding confidently when Tom asked if the laminated veneer lumber was installed to spec. But something didn't feel right. As Silva walked across the floor above, it felt soft, spongy, not solid. Still, he gave Carl the benefit of the doubt. Hours later, a deep, ominous cracking sound rippled through the house. Everyone froze. The ceiling shifted slightly, just 1 inch, but enough to send shock through the team. Silva rushed to the basement, and what he saw made his stomach twist. The main support beam wasn't anchored, wasn't bolted, wasn't secure. It was resting on temporary jack posts with no permanent support in place. The structure was one stress point away from full collapse. Cameras were rolling. Homeowners were nearby. Lives and reputations were at risk. Tom shut the site down immediately and demanded answers. When Carl was called in, he confessed. He had subcontracted the work to a friend while managing his other job. No inspections, no follow-up, no transparency. Silva was stunned. Carl wasn't just a co-worker, he was someone he had vouched for, someone whose name meant something. And now, that name had put the show's legacy, the homeowner's safety, and Tom's personal credibility on the line. The producers were livid. Carl was removed from the show. His footage was edited out, and his name disappeared from future call sheets. Silva, usually stoic, took it personally. He stayed late that night, pacing the site, questioning how he missed the signs. But the truth was simple. Even the most seasoned professionals can let ego or ambition blind their judgment. Carl had all the tools, all the talent, but none of the loyalty when it mattered most. For Silva, it wasn't just a structural failure. It was the most painful breach of trust in his decades-long career. Out of all the names Tom Silva revealed, none stunned fans more than Greg Walters. Greg wasn't loud like Jensen, or dismissive like Mike Holloway. He was polished, composed, and appeared to be everything the show needed. That's what made his deception so dangerous. He walked onto the set of this old house during a massive renovation project in Connecticut, introduced by a producer who trusted his credentials. Greg had the look of a pro, clean-cut, well-spoken, armed with certifications, glowing references, and a confidence that could sell anything. He breezed through early meetings, charmed the crew, and even impressed the homeowners. But beneath that slick surface was a ticking time bomb of shortcuts, cover-ups, and lies that almost destroyed the foundation of the project and the integrity of the show. At first, the signs were subtle. Deadlines slipped slightly. Measurements were off just enough to raise an eyebrow. Greg's team took longer than expected to complete framing tasks, but there was always a reason: waiting on materials, needing a spec confirmation, holding off for homeowner approval. Still, Silva's instincts began to buzz. He took a walk through the addition Greg's crew had framed, and immediately spotted critical issues: misaligned studs, loose headers, and joist hangers that looked like they'd been installed by amateurs. None of it was inspection ready. When Tom confronted Greg, the response was smooth but evasive. "We were rushing," he said. "I'll double-check it all before inspection." But when Silva asked for permits and logs, Greg kept deflecting. Day after day, he claimed to have left the paperwork at home. That's when Tom made a call to the local building department, and what he learned shook him. Greg hadn't filed all the permits. Some were incomplete, and others didn't exist. Worse still, Greg had lied to inspectors, telling them certain stages were done and ready for sign-off, when they hadn't even begun. It wasn't just laziness, it was a web of deception that put everything at risk. Had an accident occurred, the homeowners would have had no legal protection. If the addition failed an inspection post-construction, it would have cost tens of thousands to redo. Silva immediately pulled Greg off the site and held an emergency meeting with producers. Filming halted. A third-party inspection team was brought in to verify every inch of Greg's work, and the show suffered massive delays and unexpected costs. But for Silva, the worst part wasn't the scheduling chaos, it was the betrayal of the show's values. This old house built its reputation on honesty. It showed the messy, real, sometimes grueling process of home renovation, warts and all. Greg didn't just fake documents, he faked the one thing Silva could never tolerate: authenticity. Greg Walters was blacklisted, his footage edited out, his name quietly erased from the show's history. But the damage he caused lingered like sawdust in the air. Silva later admitted in an interview that Greg's betrayal taught him a brutal lesson. Not everyone who talks the talk can be trusted to walk the beams. Since then, Silva has personally reviewed every credential, every reference, and every permit tied to a new hire. Because after Greg, he realized that even the most convincing smile can hide the most dangerous cracks. Tom Silva isn't the kind of man who talks just to be heard. For over 4 decades he kept his head down, his tools sharp and his standards even sharper. Through missed deadlines, clashing personalities, and moments that could have unraveled entire projects, Silva stayed silent. Not out of fear, but out of loyalty. Loyalty to the mission of this old house, to the vision of honest craftsmanship, and to a crew that at its best felt like family. But silence can only protect so much, and after years of patching holes in drywall and in trust, Silva finally realized something: the truth matters more than the illusion. When he decided to speak publicly about the 5 worst employees he'd ever worked with, it wasn't revenge, it was responsibility. He wasn't trying to shame anyone. He was trying to protect the values that millions of viewers had come to rely on. For decades, this old house presented construction as a dance of precision, timing, and teamwork. But what happens when one dancer is out of rhythm? When one contractor puts ego before safety? Or when a worker leaves live wires exposed in a home filled with children? Those aren't minor errors. They're landmines hiding under polished floors. And Silva, who always placed trust above talent, had been burned too many times. For years he believed in giving second chances, in mentoring, in setting the example. But time and again he saw how a single bad hire could derail weeks of planning, break the spirit of a team, and even endanger homeowners. This confession, this public unmasking of the worst employees he'd encountered, was his way of setting the record straight, not for drama, but for legacy. Because legacy isn't just about what you build, it's about what you protect. By sharing these stories, Silva pulled back the curtain not to create scandal, but to remind us all that excellence isn't just about tools and talent, it's about integrity. These weren't nameless mistakes, they were wake-up calls, each louder than the last, each reminding him that leadership means telling the truth, even when it hurts. When asked why he finally opened up, Silva simply said, "People trust us. They deserve to know what really happens behind the walls." And that's the kind of honesty you can't teach with a hammer. You lead by example. Always. Tom Silva never set out to be a television personality. He wasn't chasing fame or airtime, he was chasing precision, integrity, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. Over the years, viewers saw him guide rookies, mediate conflicts, and navigate projects where one wrong move could undo months of planning. But what many never saw were the cracks behind the walls, not in the homes, but in the team. The names he revealed: Mike Holloway, Darren Cole, Ray Jensen, Peterson, Greg Walters, weren't just stories of failure. They were cautionary tales about what happens when talent lacks humility, when experience loses accountability, and when ego outweighs effort. Silva's decision to finally speak out wasn't an act of bitterness. It was a blueprint for every team, every leader, every craftsman who believes in the value of hard work and mutual respect. Because this old house wasn't just about fixing homes, it was about building trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't get patched up with plaster. It takes courage to admit that even in the best crews, the wrong people sometimes slip through. And it takes even more strength to call it out when it threatens everything you've built. Silva didn't just point fingers, he pulled back the curtain to show the weight of leadership, the burden of loyalty, and the high cost of silence. In doing so, he reminded us that even icons have limits, and even legends have breaking points. So as the cameras continue rolling, and new apprentices step onto the job site, one truth stands taller than any frame Silva ever raised: the most important thing you build isn't the house, it's the standard. And that standard starts with honesty. Which name surprised you the most? Which mistake would have pushed you over the edge? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more untold stories from your favorite shows, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Because behind every masterpiece there's a story, and sometimes, that story is more shocking than the renovation itself.